This is a sound that changed the very landscape of the North American continent. Harsh, piercing, and completely unforgiving. A metallic scream blending the raw power of a high-revving engine with the brutal screech of steel teeth tearing into heartwood. In the 1950s and 60s, this echoing roar across the forests of Oregon, Washington, and California meant only one thing: an economic boom. With these machines, America cleared thousands of miles for new interstate highways, harvested billions of board feet of prime timber, and built the endless suburban sprawl for the post-war generation. In those days, a chainsaw wasn't just backyard garden equipment. It was the primary weapon of a heavy, hazardous, and incredibly respected industry. And at the absolute peak of its power, a single American company controlled up to 70% of this massive global market. Its name was McCulloch. And to millions of workers, that name was synonymous with indestructible, compromise-free power. If you saw that bright yellow metal chassis sitting in the back of a pickup truck, you knew that the man driving it made his living through raw, hard labor. Short pause. The music turns lower and darker, but today, that sound has vanished from professional timberlands forever. The giant that practically invented the modern one-man chainsaw industry quietly faded away, leaving behind nothing but abandoned, hollowed-out factory walls, rusting assembly lines, and forgotten patents. How did a corporation armed with limitless financial resources, the finest engineering school in the country, and the fanatical, almost religious loyalty of loggers manage to completely lose its own home market? This is the story of how the sunk cost trap, institutional blindness, and just one single strategic mistake can erase an engineering legend from the face of the earth in a matter of years. To understand the sheer scale of this catastrophe, we have to go back to 1948. Before this moment, felling a tree was a brutal, collective ordeal that had barely changed since the 19th century. Chainsaws existed, of course, but they were monstrous behemoths, weighing well over 100 pounds. They resembled stationary tractor engines with a crude bar and chain bolted onto them. Operating one required 2 men, immense physical strength, and endless patience. These saws stalled constantly, demanded absolute cleanliness, and could only operate strictly horizontally. The slightest tilt, and the primitive carburetors would instantly flood the engine with fuel. Everything changed when Robert McCulloch stepped onto the stage. An aeronautical engineer, industrialist, and a man with a reputation as a mad genius. During World War II, his company manufactured lightweight 2-stroke engines for target drone aircraft commissioned by the U.S. military. McCulloch knew everything there was to know about 2-stroke power. How to wring out maximum torque, how to shave off dead weight, and how to make a motor run in any position. He was a man who backed his engineering instinct over the dry spreadsheets of financial analysts. This was the very same McCulloch who, years later, would buy the actual stone London Bridge, dismantle it brick by brick, and ship it to the Arizona desert, simply because he had the money and the vision to do it. McCulloch's proposition for the timber industry was simple yet revolutionary. The tool must belong to a single operator. In 1948, his factory in Los Angeles released the McCulloch 3-25. Those numbers would be etched into history forever. 3 horsepower, 25 pounds of weight. Just over 11 kilograms. It was a tectonic shift. For the first time, a lone logger could pick up a saw, sling it over his shoulder, climb a tree, and fell it without a single hand of help. The speed of timber harvesting skyrocketed. But the true triumph came 20 years later, when the company introduced the legendary Mac 10-10 series. The weight dropped to 15 pounds, while the power surged. The American school of chainsaw design solidified its core principles. Massive engine displacement, a rugged magnesium-aluminum crankcase built to survive the impact of falling limbs, and a stark, almost primitive simplicity. There was nothing unnecessary in these machines. If a saw gave out in a remote thicket, a logger could completely tear it down and rebuild it using a flathead screwdriver and a universal wrench right there on a tree stump, under a pouring rain. By the late 1960s, McCulloch's yellow saws were the undisputed monarchs of the American logging industry. Corporate leadership rested on its laurels, and profits seemed infinite. But while they were counting their millions, a quiet threat was brewing on the other side of the planet, one that American directors dismissed as completely irrelevant. While American manufacturers were competing against each other in pure engine displacement and aggressive marketing, European engineers were facing entirely different challenges. In densely populated Europe, forests were carefully managed, and labor laws were strict. It was there that engineers first paid attention to an unforeseen factor: the human cost. By the early 1970s, a frightening medical statistic began spreading among professional loggers in the United States. Thousands of workers were complaining of a severe medical pathology known as Raynaud syndrome, or white finger disease. Because heavy American saws featured a rigid, direct metal-to-metal bolt connection from the handle to the crankcase, the destructive vibration of the high RPM two-stroke motor traveled directly into the operator's hands. Over years of work, the capillaries and nerve endings in the logger's fingers were irreversibly destroyed. Hands went numb, fingers turned deathly pale in the cold, and men suffered agonizing pain, turning into disabled individuals who could barely hold a cup of coffee. At the exact same time, a Swedish company named Husqvarna approached the problem from a high-tech angle. The Swedes had immense experience building championship-winning motocross motorcycles. They knew how suspension worked. Husqvarna's engineers applied this exact expertise to the chainsaw. They split the chassis into two independent structures. The heavy, vibrating engine and fuel tank were completely isolated from the handles by a system of steel springs and rubber dampeners. When you fired up a Swedish saw, the engine shook violently, but the operator's hands remained perfectly still. Simultaneously, Germany's Stihl achieved another breakthrough: they mass-produced the inertia chain brake. In a kickback event, when the saw bar was violently thrown upward toward the operator, a specialized guard instantly locked the spinning chain in a fraction of a second, saving loggers from catastrophic facial and neck injuries. How did Los Angeles react? American top executives looked at these European innovations with blatant skepticism. They calculated the cost of completely retooling their casting molds and assembly lines for these convoluted designs and decided it wasn't worth the investment. In McCulloch's boardrooms, a cynical sentiment echoed: "Our guys in the woods are tough. They don't need these European, soft features, extra springs, and fragile plastic. As long as our saws cost less and deliver more torque to the piston, they will buy American." It was a fatal, catastrophic underestimation of the enemy. The year was 1974. On the desks of McCulloch's forward-thinking engineers, the blueprints for next-generation saws were already laid out. They weren't foolish people, they saw the data, they tore down the European competitors, and they knew exactly which way the wind was blowing. They had designs featuring excellent anti-vibration systems and integrated safety chain brakes. But to push these models into mass production, the board of directors had to commit to massive capital expenditure. They needed to halt production, write off as a total loss, and scrap multi-million-dollar stamping presses, automated lines, and foundry molds. Equipment that was specifically engineered for the old magnesium blocks and had not yet fully depreciated on the corporate balance sheets. From a short-term profit perspective, throwing away perfectly functional machinery seemed like madness to the accountants. And the institution made its choice. The bean counters defeated the engineers. Leadership chose the path of least resistance, a path that seemed safe on paper but marked the beginning of the end. Instead of investing in innovation and fighting for the elite of the timber industry, they decided to change their target audience entirely. McCulloch abandoned the professional logging camps and staked its future on the average backyard consumer. They walked out of the deep woods and onto the shelves of suburban big-box retail stores. The professional market is a high-margin ecosystem. A professional logger doesn't care if a saw costs $300 or $500. To him, that saw is a capital asset. He cares about cutting speed, engine lifespan, and the safety of his own body. When American loggers realized that Swedish and German saws cut 25% faster, weighed less, and didn't leave their hands throbbing with nerve damage, they made their choice. Within a few short years, the U.S. professional market was completely surrendered to European brands. Stihl and Husqvarna seized the most lucrative slice of the industry. Meanwhile, on the shelves of supermarkets and retailers like Sears, Kmart, and Home Depot, a deadly trap was waiting for McCulloch. Yes, they were selling millions of light, simplified saws to ordinary suburbanites who needed to trim an apple tree branch once a year or cut firewood for a weekend barbecue. But the rules of this game were dictated entirely by the retail giants. They demanded constant reductions in wholesale prices. They wanted to see a $99 saw on the shelf. To meet these brutal price targets, McCulloch was forced to strip quality out of everything. Rugged magnesium alloys were replaced with cheap, brittle plastic. Manufacturing tolerances widened, carburetors became unadjustable, and assembly became sloppy. The net profit margin on a single saw plummeted to just a few dollars. Eventually, the company found itself trapped in a vicious downward spiral. Massive sales volume yielding negligible margins, which were then entirely eaten up by the warranty repair costs of fragile, plastic tools. McCulloch simply had no capital left to hire top-tier talent or fund the development of a fundamentally new, competitive engine platform. The institutional gap transformed into an unbridgeable abyss. The end did not come with a sudden explosion. It was a long, agonizing, and humiliating decay that dragged on for 2 decades. Endless layoffs, the closure of historic factories in California, asset sell-offs, bankruptcies, and a revolving door of corporate owners, each trying to squeeze the last remaining drops of value out of a once great name. The finale of this drama reads like a cruel twist of poetic justice. In the late 1990s, the remains of the bankrupt American empire were bought up piecemeal. And they were bought by the very same European conglomerate whose innovations American executives had laughed at in the 70s. The Husqvarna Group. Today, the McCulloch trademark still exists. But of its former glory, of the scent of the California timberlands and the pride of American manufacturing, nothing remains. The once legendary name is used by the Swedes merely as a secondary, low-tier sub-brand to sell budget consumer lawnmowers and light-weight trimmers in European retail chains. The true tragedy of this story is that the American engineers on the factory floors knew exactly what to do. They had the talent, they had the blueprints, they had the manufacturing foundation. They could have built the finest next-generation chainsaw in the world back in 1975. But the company's executive leadership had forgotten how to listen to its own engineers. They protected legacy investments, they protected the inheritance of 30 years of successful sales, completely failing to realize that the world around them had changed forever. In this invisible battle of efficient managers against technological progress, history itself lost. We didn't just lose a major manufacturer. We lost an entire era when heavy tools were built by masters for masters, engineered with the expectation that they would last for decades and be passed down from father to son. Today, we live in a world of plastic, disposable things, engineered by marketers for the sake of beautiful quarterly balance sheets. And that is exactly why those old, heavy iron machines evoke such profound nostalgia. If your life or your family's life was ever tied to the woods. If your father, your grandfather, or you yourself still have an old, heavy iron McCulloch chainsaw sitting in the garage, scratched up, beaten down, but still starting on the first pull and working against all odds, write about it in the comments. Share their story. In a world of plastic, these iron monsters and the men who swung them deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to the channel. We are building the largest, most honest archive of industrial documentaries on YouTube. Every single like and comment helps the algorithms push this video so it can find those who truly value industrial history and respect hard, human labor. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.